1986 Continental Indigenous Council, Fairbanks, Alaska, by Lee Brown Cherokee, Chapter 2. So tribes began to send people to the mountains to have visions to try to figure out how they could survive. At that time, there were 100,000 cities in the Mississippi Valley alone, called the Mound Civilization. Cities built on great mounds. Those mounds are still there. They began to try to live off the land because they knew a hard time was going to come. They began to send people to have visions to see how we could survive this time. They were told in the prophecies that we should try to remind all the people that would come here of the sacredness of all things. If we could do that, then there would be peace on earth. But if we could not do that, if we had not come together as a human family, the Great Spirit would grab the earth with his hand and shake it. The elders on the West Coast prophesied that they would begin to build a black ribbon. And on this black ribbon, there would be moving bugs. And when you begin to see this bug moving on the land, that was the sign of the first shaking of the earth. The first shaking of the earth would be so violent that this bug would be shaken off the earth into the air, and it would begin to move and fly in the air. And by the end of this shaking, this bug will be in the air around the world. Behind it would be a trail of dirt, and eventually the whole sky of the entire earth would become dirty from these trails of dirt. And this would cause many diseases and would get more and more complicated. So the bug moving on the land, of course, it's easy to see now. In 1908, the Model T Ford was mass-produced for the first time. So the elders knew the first shaking of the earth was about to come about. That was the First World War. In the First World War, the airplane came into wide usage for the first time. That was that bug moving into the sky. And so they knew something very important would happen. There would be an attempt to make peace on earth on the west coast of this land, and so the elders began to watch for this. They began to hear that there was going to be a League of Nations in San Francisco. So the elders gathered in Arizona in 1920 or so, and they wrote a letter to the Woodrow Wilson. They asked if the Indian people could be included in the League of Nations. The United States Supreme Court had held that a reservation is a separate and semi-sovereign nation, not a part of the United States, but protected by it. This became a concern because people didn't want the reservations to become more and more separate. They didn't want them to be considered nations. So they did not write back, and the native people were left out of the League of Nations. So that circle was incomplete. In the League of Nations circle, there was a southern door, the yellow people. There was a western door, the black people. There was a northern door, the white people. But the eastern door was not attended. The elders knew that peace would not come on the earth until the circle of humanity is complete. Until all the four colors sat in the circle and shared their teachings, then peace would come on earth. So they knew things would happen. This would speed up a little. There would be a cobweb built around the earth, and the people would talk across the cobweb. When this talking cobweb, the telephone, was built around the earth, a sign of life would appear in the east. But it would tilt and bring death, the swastika of the Nazis. It would come with the sun. But the sun itself would rise one day, not in the east, but in the west, the rising sun of the Japanese Empire. So the elders said, when you see the sun rising in the east, and you see the sign of life reversed and tilted in the east, you will know that the great death is to come upon the earth. Now is when the Great Spirit will grab the earth again in his hand and shake it. And this shaking will be worse than the first. So the sign of life reversed and tilted. We call that the swastika. And the rising sun in the east was the rising sun of Japan. These two symbols are carved in stone in Arizona. When the elders saw these two flags, they knew that these were the signs that the earth was to be shaken again. The worst misuse of the guardianship of the fire is called the Gourd of Ashes. They said the Gourd of Ashes will fall from the air. It will make the people like blades of grass in the prairie fire, and things will not grow for many seasons. The atomic bomb, the Gourd of Ashes, it was the best kept secret in the history of the U.S. The elders wanted to speak about it in 1920. They would have spoken of it and foretold its coming if they could have entered into the League of Nations. The elders tried to contact President Roosevelt to ask him not to use the Gourd of Ashes because it would have a great effect on Earth and eventually cause even greater destruction and the third shaking of the earth, the Third World War. So they knew after the second shaking of the earth, when they saw the Gourd of Ashes fall from the sky, there would be an attempt to make peace on the other side of this land. And because the peace attempt on the west coast had failed, they would build a special house on the east coast of this turtle island, and all the nations and peoples of the earth would come to this house, and it would be called the House of Mica, and it would shine like the mica on the desert shines. So the elders began to see they were building the United Nations made out of glass that reflects like the mica on the desert. So they knew this was the House of Mica, and all the peoples of the earth should go to it. So they met and talked about this. They said that in the 1920s they had written and they had not been responded to. So they said this time we'd better go to the front door of the House of Mica because things might get a lot worse. So elders representing a number of tribes drove to New York City. When the United Nations opened, they went to the front door of the House of Mica, and they said these words: "We represent the Indigenous people of North America, and we wish to address the United Nations of the earth. We're going to give you 4 days to consider whether or not we will be allowed to speak." They retreated to one of the 6 Nations reserves in New York State. 4 days later, they came back. And I believe the nations of the earth heard the Indians had come to the door, and they voted to let the Indians in. They wanted to hear what they had to say. But the United States is one of 5 nations of the United Nations with a veto power. And they still were concerned because this time the native sovereignty was even stronger. And I believe they vetoed the entrance of the native people. So then they knew other things would happen on the earth. So they retreated to the 6 Nations Reserve, and they talked about this, and they said, the time is really getting close now, 1949. They said, we're going to divide the United States into 4 sections, and each year we're going to have a gathering. We're going to call those the White Roots of Peace gatherings. They began to have these around 1950, and they authorized certain people to speak in English for the first time about these prophecies. One that I used to listen to many times over and over was Thomas Banyaka. He was authorized to speak in English about what was on the stone tablets, and he has dedicated his life to doing this. And they began to tell us at these gatherings you're going to see a time in your lifetime when the human beings are going to find the blueprint that makes us. They call that now DNA. They said they're going to cut this blueprint. They call that now genetic splicing. And they said they're going to make new animals upon the earth. And they're going to think these are going to help us. And it's going to seem like they do help us, but maybe the grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to suffer. The elders said long ago, they will release these things and they will use them. This is going to be released not too long from now. They are making new animals. The elders talked about this. You will see new animals, and even the old animals will come back. Animals that people thought had disappeared. They will find them here and there, and they'll begin to reappear. You're going to see a time when the eagle will fly its highest in the night, and it will land upon the moon. And at that time, many of the native people will be sleeping, which symbolically means they have lost their teachings. We're at that time now. The eagle has landed on the moon, 1969. When that spaceship landed, they sent back the message, the eagle has landed. Traditionally, native people from clear up in the Inuit region have shared with us this prophecy, clear down to the Quechuas in South America. At this time, you're going to see these things will speed up, that people on the earth will move faster and faster. Grandchildren will not have time for grandparents. Parents will not have time for children. It will seem like time is going faster and faster. The elders advised us that as things speed up, you yourself should slow down. The faster things go, the slower you go. Because there's going to come a time when the earth is going to be shaken a third time. The Great Spirit has shaken the earth 2 times. The First and Second World Wars, to remind us that we are a human family, to remind us that we should have greeted each other as brothers and sisters. We had a chance after each shaking to come together in a circle that would have brought peace on earth, but we missed that.